Sarah and Mike were two college students on their way to Albuquerque for spring break in 1997. They weren't the typical spring breakers looking for wild parties and beaches. Instead, they were adventurers seeking out hidden gems and forgotten towns along the legendary Route 66. As they drove through a lonely stretch of highway, surrounded by endless desert, the gas gauge dipped dangerously close to empty. They hadn't seen a gas station or a place to stop for hours. The isolation was starting to weigh on them when Sarah pointed out a faint glow in the distance. "Do you see that?" she asked, leaning forward in her seat. Mike squinted into the darkness until he saw it too. A neon sign flickering weakly, its letters spelling out, "Jack's All-Night Diner." Relief washed over them as they pulled off the road and onto the gravel lot in front of the diner. It looked like something out of a 1950s postcard. Chrome siding, red vinyl booths visible through the windows, and a few classic cars parked out front. Inside, the place was dead quiet. The smell of coffee and fried food hung in the air, but there was something unsettling about the silence. The couple exchanged uneasy glances, but chalked it up to exhaustion. A woman in her late 50s, wearing a retro waitress uniform, approached them with a menu. Her name tag read, Marge. She had a warm smile, but her eyes seemed oddly vacant. "Welcome to Jack's. Sit anywhere you like," she said, her voice slightly monotone. Sarah and Mike took a booth near the window. As they settled in, Sarah noticed the other patrons. There was a man in a trucker hat sitting at the counter, nursing a cup of coffee, and a young woman in the corner who looked like she'd been crying. Every now and then, the woman would glance toward the door as if she were waiting for someone. The trucker didn't even acknowledge them, just stared blankly ahead. The menu was bizarrely simple. Burgers, fries, pancakes, coffee. No descriptions, no specials, just the basics. "I'll take a cheeseburger," Mike said when Marge returned. Sarah ordered pancakes, and Marge disappeared into the kitchen. That's when things started feeling wrong. First, the diner's clock didn't match the time on their watches. It read 12:47 a.m., but Mike swore it was only 11:15. Then, there was the faint buzzing sound, like static, that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Sarah noticed the young woman in the corner suddenly tense up, her hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Everything okay?" Sarah asked cautiously. The woman looked up, her eyes wide with fear. She opened her mouth to speak, but Marge returned at that moment with their food. Without another word, the young woman grabbed her purse and bolted out the door. "She didn't even pay," Mike muttered. They tried to shake off the unease and eat their food. The burger tasted fine, but Sarah swore the pancakes tasted metallic, almost bitter. Mike told her she was imagining things. As they ate, the trucker finally moved. He turned slowly toward them, his expression blank, and said, "You shouldn't have stopped here." Before they could respond, the lights flickered. The faint buzz grew louder, and the air seemed to hum with tension. The trucker stood abruptly, throwing a few crumpled bills on the counter, and walked out into the night. "Let's go," Sarah whispered, her voice shaking. But Mike insisted on finishing his meal. When they went to pay, Marge rang them up without a word, her vacant eyes fixed on something far beyond them. They stepped outside into the cool desert air and froze. The cars that had been parked outside were gone. The gravel lot was empty, except for their own car. The diner's neon sign was off, and the building looked different. The chrome siding was rusted and peeling. The windows were shattered, and the red vinyl booths they'd just been sitting in were covered in dust. Sarah grabbed Mike's arm. "We need to leave, now." They sprinted to their car and peeled out of the lot, speeding down the highway. But as they drove, something was off. The landscape looked the same, but the diner didn't fade into the distance behind them. Instead, it stayed in their rearview mirror, its darkened silhouette looming like a shadow that refused to let go. Finally, after what felt like hours, they spotted headlights approaching from the opposite direction. They flagged down the driver, a middle-aged man in a pickup truck, and explained what had happened. The man listened patiently, his face growing pale. "You said Jack's Diner," he asked. That place burned down in 1981. A grease fire killed everyone inside. Sarah and Mike stared at him, speechless. The man shook his head, his voice trembling. People say it still shows up sometimes, late at night, always the same, but anyone who stops, well, they don't make it out of this desert. The couple didn't stick around to ask more questions. They drove straight to Albuquerque, their nerves frayed, and never spoke about the incident again. But to this day, Sarah swears she can still taste those bitter pancakes. And sometimes, late at night, Mike dreams of a diner with flickering neon lights and a waitress named Marge staring out into the dark. So if you're ever driving down Route 66 and see a diner glowing in the middle of nowhere, think twice before you stop. Some places are meant to stay forgotten.